Several weeks ago, maybe it's a couple of months ago, we did a class on Moses, and part of that lesson was about manna, and we didn't have time, so just developed a whole new lesson about the topic of manna. So today we're going to look at manna and the bread of life. We kind of ran out of the book and we're doing an extra lesson, so today manna and the bread of life. Here's the two main verses about shadows that we've been using. Colossians 2, these are a shadow of the things that were to come. The reality, however, is found in Christ. And then Hebrews 10, the law is only a shadow of the good things that are coming, not the realities themselves. And I picked out another verse, I fade away like an evening shadow, Psalm 109. And that talks about the shortness of life. And made me think of a sundial. For sundials, they give us the illusion of the passing of time. Life is fleeting, and we should make good use of the time we have. Some people think of reading the time on a sundial by seeing where the shadow is, but in reality it is not the position of the shadow, but the position of the sun. Too often we are focused on where the shadow is instead of where the sun is, and that could have a double meaning there as far as S-U-N and S-O-N. The sundial shows us time cannot be stopped. Time does not stand still, but that shadow continues to move. It reminds us that our life is short, but if we look at the source of the light, which is God, we see an eternal life in our future. The sundial is a symbol of the passage of time and our connection with nature and its limitations. So today we're talking about bread, or manna. You might think, what is manna? And it was the original Wonder Bread. So God whipped up a miracle and gave manna to the Israelites. And there was a verse that calls it bread from angels. So it could also be called angel food cake, I guess. But I was watching a nutrition presentation about bread recently. One thing mentioned was that bread you buy now in the store has been processed so much that it's lost its nutritional value. It has been genetically modified to resist bugs and grow abundantly, resulting in a lack of sustenance. In the old days, when the grains were ground by stone, you could make bread that could provide all the nourishment you needed for the day. It would be your daily bread. Okay, so if we look at manna, we go to Exodus 16 to see the beginning. It starts with the Israelites grumbling. When they were freed from Egypt, it was not long until they started complaining. Exodus 12:37 says there is about 600,000 men, not counting women and children, that was being led by Moses. That chapter also mentions they baked cakes of unleavened bread on the journey, and they had flocks and herds, but they were hungry. So maybe they were not as much hungry as they liked to complain. So let's read Exodus 16. In the desert, the whole community grumbled against Moses and Aaron. The Israelites said to them, "If only we had died by the Lord's hand in Egypt. There we sat around pots of meat and ate all the food we wanted. But you have brought us out into this desert to starve this entire assembly to death." Then the Lord said to Moses, "I will rain down bread from heaven for you. The people are to go out each day and gather enough for that day. In this way I will test them and see whether they will follow my instructions. On the sixth day they are to prepare what they bring in, and that is to be twice as much as they gather on the other days." Skipping down to verse 13. That evening quail came and covered the camp, and in the morning there was a layer of dew around the camp. When the dew was gone, thin flakes like frost on the ground appeared on the desert floor. When the Israelites saw it, they said to each other, "What is this?" For they did not know what it was. Moses said to them, "It is bread the Lord has given you to eat. This is what the Lord has commanded. Each one is to gather as much as he needs. Take an omer for each person you have in your tent." The Israelites did as they were told. Some gathered much, some little. And when they had measured it by the omer, he who had gathered much did not have too much. He who gathered little did not have too little. Each one gathered as much as he needed. Then Moses said to them, "No one is to keep any of it till morning." However, some of them paid no attention to Moses. They kept part of it until morning, but it was full of maggots and began to smell. So Moses was angry with them. Each morning everyone gathered as much as he needed. And when the sun grew hot, it melted away. On the 6th day, they gathered twice as much, 2 omers for each person. And the leaders of the community came and reported this to Moses. He said to them, "This is what the Lord commanded. Tomorrow is to be a day of rest, a holy Sabbath to the Lord. So bake what you want to bake, and boil what you want to boil, save whatever is left, and keep until morning." So they saved it until morning, as Moses had commanded, and it did not stink or get maggots in it. "Eat it today," Moses said, "because today is a Sabbath to the Lord. You will not find any of it on the ground today. 6 days you are to gather, but on the 7th day, the Sabbath, there will not be any." Nevertheless, some of the people went out on the 7th day to gather, but found none. Then the Lord said to Moses, "How long will you refuse to keep my commands and instructions? Bear in mind that the Lord has given you the Sabbath. That is why on the 6th day he gives you bread for 2 days. Everyone is to stay where he is on the 7th day. No one is to go out." So the people rested on the 7th day. The people of Israel called the bread manna. It was white like coriander seed and tasted like wafers made with honey. Moses said, "This is what the Lord has commanded. Take an omer of manna and keep it for the generations to come, so that they can see the bread I gave you to eat in the desert when I brought you out of Egypt." So Moses said to Aaron, "Take a jar and put an omer of manna in it. Then place it before the Lord to be kept for the generations to come." And the Lord commanded Moses, "Aaron, put the manna in front of the testimony, that it might be kept." The Israelites ate manna 40 years until they came to a land that was settled. They ate manna until they reached the border of Canaan. One thing I want us to get out of the lesson today is God's provision for the people of Israel and also God's provision for us. We see here that they had manna for 40 years, and you would think that after a while they would forget that it was a miracle and just expect it, that it would be common. They would take it for granted. And also for us, we come to church every week and kind of take it for granted. We take it for granted all the blessings that God gives us, but God provides for us every day. So we need to remember that things that we take for granted are really miracles for us or blessings for us, God's provision for us. So let's keep that in mind during this lesson. The rabbis afterwards, in the Talmud, it would explain that the passage is talking about 3 different groups of people. This is part of their tradition. This is not in the Bible. But they explain there's 3 different parts or 3 different groups of people that are gathering manna during these 40 years. And I think this is kind of part of the rabbis creating classes among the people, possibly, but they said there were the three groups: the righteous, the average people, and the wicked. They said for the righteous people, the manna came down at the door of their homes in the camp and was ready to eat like bread, so they didn't have to work for it at all. The average people had to go outside the camp and collect it, and then they had to bake it. And then there was the wicked people that had to walk far away from the camp and collect the manna, and they had to start by grinding it into flour. So it's kind of an odd tradition that they had. And I got that from the Jewish website called Shabbat.org. Numbers 11 says this about the manna. The rabble with them began to crave other food, and again the Israelites started wailing and said, "If only we had meat to eat. We remember the fish we ate in Egypt at no cost. Also the cucumbers, melons, leeks, onions, and garlic. But now we have lost our appetite. We never see anything but this manna." So we see in the beginning of Exodus 16, the people were complaining about not having food, so God provided quail and manna for them. And then after a while of eating that, they started complaining about what God had given them to eat, and they wanted more variety. And this is kind of like human nature. We're never satisfied. We always want more and more and more. It's kind of the grass is greener on the other side. So Jesus is our bread of life, yet like them, we may hunger for more variety, even though he provides all we ever need. Deuteronomy 8 says, "He humbled you, causing you to hunger, and then feeding you with manna, which neither of you nor your fathers had known, to teach you that man does not live by bread alone, but on every word that comes from the mouth of God." And you might remember Jesus quoting this verse when he was tempted by Satan, when he was in the wilderness for 40 days. So this verse is a strong shadow of Jesus. If you think about it, to receive Jesus, we must humble ourselves. When he came to earth, Jewish leaders did not know him, nor did their forefathers. Jesus quoted this verse when he was tempted by Satan. Also in John's Gospel, he opens by calling Jesus the Word. So there you see the word underlined, the word underlined. Also remember the Israelites had manna for 40 years. Jesus was tempted after 40 days by Satan was tempting him to perform a miracle on a rock to turn it into bread. So that might have been a shadow as well. Nehemiah 9, "You gave your good spirit to instruct them. You did not hold your manna from their mouths, and you gave them water for their thirst. For 40 years you sustained them in the desert. They lacked nothing. Their clothes did not wear out, nor did their feet become swollen." So besides food and water, they never had to worry about new clothes or new shoes. So they were lasted for the whole time period. So in this verse, God shows his love by providing food and water, as well as clothing and footwear, and they were like children who take their parents' gifts without a second thought. Psalm 78, this is from the psalmist Asaph. "Yet he gave a command to the skies above and opened the doors of the heavens. He rained down manna for the people to eat. He gave them the grain of heaven. Men ate the bread of angels. He sent them all the food they could eat." So here Asaph is indicating that it was not just food, but divine food. And it was like a 40-year buffet. Joshua 5 says, "The manna stopped the day after they ate this food from the land. There was no longer any manna for the Israelites, but that year they ate of the produce of Canaan." So they feasted on God's provision till they came to the land flowing with milk and honey. Philip of Alexander was born about 20 years before Jesus. One thing about him, you may recall that when Jesus was born, the angels encouraged Joseph and Mary to flee to Egypt. There was a large population of Jews in Alexandria, so it could be that that's where they fled. So there might have been some overlap with Philip there in Alexandria. But the Jews, one thing about Philo is there was a tradition that the first Redeemer caused the manna to fall from heaven. Even so, should the second Redeemer cause manna to fall? That was the last part of that slide. Philo was a Hellenistic Jewish philosopher who lived in Alexandria in the Roman province of Egypt. He tried to merge Hebrew and Greek thinking together. He introduced the Greek concept of logos, conceived by Heraclitus, and the Stoic philosophers tried to merge that into Judaism. It was a belief that a pot of the manna had been hidden in the ark in the first temple, and that when the temple was destroyed, Jeremiah had hidden it away and would produce it again when the Messiah came. In other words, the Jews were challenging Jesus to produce bread from God in order to substantiate his claims. So this is part of the teaching that was going around during the time of Jesus, that the Messiah would cause manna to fall from the sky again. So that might help explain part of what happens in John chapter 6. And we'll start at the very beginning. This is not the part about manna, but it's about Jesus in Bethsaida. Yes, I think it was Jesus in Bethsaida with a large crowd around him, and then he fed them bread and fish. But let's go ahead and read this so that we can kind of get into the mindset of manna. Sometime after this, Jesus crossed to the far shore of the Sea of Galilee, that is the Sea of Tiberias, and a great crowd of people followed him because they saw the miraculous signs he had performed on the sick. Then Jesus went up on a mountainside and sat down with his disciples. The Jewish Passover feast was near. When Jesus looked up and saw a great crowd coming toward him, he said to Philip, "Where shall we buy bread for these people to eat?" He asked this only to test him, for he already had in mind what he was going to do. Philip answered him, 8 months' wages would not be enough to buy bread for each one to have a bite. Another of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, spoke up. "Here is a boy with 5 small barley loaves and 2 small fish, but how far will they go among so many?" Jesus said, "Have the people sit down." There was plenty of grass in that place, and the men sat down, about 5,000 of them. Jesus then took the loaves, gave thanks, and distributed it to those who were seated as much as they wanted. He did the same with the fish. When they had all had enough to eat, he said to the disciples, "Gather the pieces that are left over. Let nothing be wasted." So they gathered them and filled 12 baskets with the pieces of the 5 barley loaves left over by those who had eaten. After the people saw the miraculous sign that Jesus did, they began to say, "Surely this is the prophet who is to come into the world." Jesus, knowing that they intended to come and make him king by force, withdrew again to a mountain by himself. When evening came, his disciples went down to the lake, where they got into a boat and set off across the lake for Capernaum. By now it was dark, and Jesus had not yet joined them. A strong wind was blowing, and the waters grew rough. When they had rowed 3 or 3.5 miles, they saw Jesus approaching the boat, walking on the water, and they were terrified. But he said to them, "It is I, don't be afraid." Then they were willing to take him into the boat, and immediately the boat reached the shore where they were heading. The next day, the crowd had stayed on the opposite shore of the lake, realizing that only one boat had been there and that Jesus had not entered it with his disciples, but they had gone away alone. Okay, so here's a satellite map of the Sea of Galilee. Bethsaida is where Jesus fed the 5,000, and then Capernaum is where the boat sailed to. Now, the two cities are 7 miles apart and would take 2.5 hours to walk, and about 2 hours to sail. It would vary depending on the wind. So to carry the comparison further, Jesus compared himself to the manna sent from God. This is another reference to the event from the time of Moses. So some boats from Tiberias landed near the place where the people had eaten the bread after the Lord had given thanks. Once the crowd realized that neither Jesus nor his disciples were there, they got into the boats and went to Capernaum in search of Jesus. When they found him on the other side of the lake, they asked him, "Rabbi, when did you get here?" Jesus answered, "I tell you the truth. If you are looking for me not because you saw miraculous signs, but because you ate the loaves and had your fill, do not work for the food that spoils, but for food that endures to eternal life, which the Son of Man will give you. On him God the Father has placed his seal of approval." And then skipping down to verse 30. So they asked him, "What miraculous sign then will you give that we may see it and believe you? What will you do? Our forefathers ate the manna in the desert, as it is written, he gave them bread from heaven to eat." And this is where that concept that Philo taught about the second Messiah bringing manna might have come into play. Verse 32, Jesus said to them, "I tell you the truth, it is not Moses who has given you the bread from heaven, but it is my Father who has given you the true bread from heaven. For the bread of God is he who comes down from heaven and gives life to the world." "Sir," they said, "from now on give us this bread." Then Jesus declared, "I am the bread of life. He who comes to me will never go hungry. He who believes in me will never be thirsty." Skipping down to verse 47. "I tell you the truth, he who believes has everlasting life. I am the bread of life. Your forefathers ate the manna in the desert, yet many died. But here is the bread that comes down from heaven, which a man may eat and not die. I am the living bread that came down from heaven. If anyone eats this bread, he will live forever. This bread is my flesh, which I give you for the life of the world." And then skipping down to the very bottom of the chapter, on hearing it, many of his disciples said, "This is a hard teaching. Who can accept it?" And then many of his disciples turned away and left. So notice that after this discourse, the disciples had difficulty understanding. They had yet to link the old to the new. We may have similar difficulty. We may have had decades of experience studying the entire Bible, yet we may miss the connection between Moses and Jesus, and between manna and the bread of life. You've probably heard the saying, "You are what you eat." But if we hunger and thirst after Jesus, does this mean we become more like him? Okay, so let's look at a comparison between the manna found in Exodus 16 and Jesus, the bread of life, in John 6. We see that in Exodus 16, the people grumbled. God responded to that. And in John 6, there's the verse that showed that the people grumbled at him as well. And this is going to have verse reference from both chapters there. And you should have this on your handout as well. So you can look them up later to see how they match up verse by verse. There is a miraculous sign for both. The bread came down from heaven for the Israelites, and Jesus is the bread that came down from heaven, both from God. Comes with instruction for the people of Israel as far as collecting it 6 days and then collecting twice as much on the 6th day. The disciples had to obey his teaching. The disobedient got maggots. In hell, the worm doesn't die. That's for the disobedient. The people needed it every day. They had a dependence on the manna. For Jesus, we need him every day. The people were given enough for the day, and Jesus is our daily bread. Also, God provides our daily bread according to the prayer that Jesus gave us an example. The manna was life-giving nourishment to the people. Jesus provides us with spiritual nourishment. The Israelites began to despise it after a time, and the people despised and rejected Jesus. There was enough manna for everyone, and Jesus is enough for all. People didn't deserve the food, and we don't deserve salvation from Jesus. They didn't have to work for it. For us, salvation is a gift of God. The people never went hungry, and if we feed on the word of Jesus, we never go hungry. All eventually died that were wandering in the wilderness, and their children went on into the promised land. All of us will live eternally if we are followers of Jesus. The manna ended after crossing into the promised land. Our bread of life endures to eternal life. They ate manna for 40 years and mentioned after 40 days of fasting, Satan tempted Jesus with the bread miracle. So as a comparison of the two, if you've studied Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you'll see that the people were on the lowest level, the level of biological and physiological needs, which is food, sleep, and water. But Jesus was speaking at the top level of self-actualization, meeting one's full potential. They were not ready for his message and found it difficult to digest. So now we move on to the questions. So what is the connection between manna, Elijah and the ravens, the widow of Zarephath, and the Lord's Prayer, as well as Jesus? God provided, in all three cases, God provided bread. The ravens brought Elijah bread at morning and night, I believe. The widow of Zarephath had a jar of oil and flour that never ran out until the rains came. The Lord's Prayer says, give us today our daily bread, and then Jesus is our bread of life. Okay. After 40 years of daily manna, do you think the Hebrews took it for granted? And do we ever take Jesus for granted? That's especially true for young people, taking each day for granted. They think they're going to live forever, pretty much. And, even in this country, we don't know anything but the freedoms that we have, whereas in a lot of places they don't have the freedoms we do, the luxuries we do. Even Arkansas is green all around us. Where my daughter and son-in-law live, they are in Albuquerque, and there's just a little green in their yard, and it's probably dead by now. But, it's a great contrast between the blessings we have here versus other places in the world. And we do take it for granted. Next question, how does the Israelites' grumbling reflect their faith in God? Jim was talking about how the people were never satisfied, and with our worship, a lot of times we want to keep adding to it, that we're never satisfied. Jim was indicating we put more focus on bringing things inside from the outside instead of being filled with Jesus. I think if we hungered and thirst after Jesus, those outside influences wouldn't mean as much. I think it's part of human nature to just kind of always want more. I think that's one of the special things about heaven, that we don't have that urge anymore, that we have that contentment is part of what we have promised in heaven. You know, in business it's called drive, and it's encouraged to have drive, to always be climbing the ladder, to achieve success that way, to strive for the next thing. Okay, Steve says that grumbling can be infectious. A lot of times we look at the faith of other people, whether it's good or bad, and we are influenced by that. Keep striving to improve our faith. God was giving them everything they needed, the food and water. Didn't have to make clothes or shoes. All they had to do was obey. And yet the people would say, we need a golden calf or something like that. And when you read through Exodus, for me, it looks like just a group of people that were complaining all the time, not content. You know, even some of the leaders, you know, Aaron and Miriam thought that maybe they should be rulers or leaders instead of Moses. There's Korah and his men wanted to be leaders. You know, there was a lot of strife going on. Jethro came and gave Moses some help as far as leadership, how to do judging over small cases versus big cases. You know, Joe says we need to be careful with our own grumbling. I think probably all of us could grumble about something in our life, but we need to look on the positive side. You know, might grumble and say, "Oh, I've got a soreness in my back today," or something like that. But look to the positive side. That today we have a day to live and glorify God. Richard says that faith is allowing God to do and say instead of us, and that we have to be willing. I guess the Israelites were kind of a captive audience. They couldn't escape there. God had led them through the Red Sea so that they couldn't go back to Egypt. That was part of the reasoning there. So they had no other option but to follow God. Whereas we have the option. You know, we have the option to be Christians or not. They were kind of stuck there. And that was probably the source of the grumbling. And like what Steve was saying about being infected by other people's grumbling, that kind of spread throughout the whole group. That once a few people that were unhappy about being there started grumbling, then it kind of spread like a bad apple in a barrel type thing. Yep, we can always find something to complain about. Always see who has it, or do a competition to see who had it the worst. Okay, next question. How does the principle of Manna's Sabbath rest apply to Jesus as our bread of life? Let me pull up the other questions. How can we remember and honor God's provision for us? And how do we hunger and thirst for Jesus to fulfill our spiritual needs? So I think we have time for one more person to comment. If anyone wants to comment.